This is the first ever pop-up Godrej India Culture Lab Friday Funda at Lakmé Fashion Week. Welcome, you're a part of history. We've always had our Friday Fundas in verdant, vivacious, virile, Bikhroli. And we've actually come to Kalina, to the heart of Fashion Week, cool Kalina. It's also like wild Vakola, and we can go on. But it's sexy Santa Cruz for sure. And we're very happy to see such a packed audience to listen to. I see familiar faces, I see people whom I don't know, but I see some really cute people whom I hope will give me the numbers later. So this is wonderful. I want to thank all of you for making time to come here. Before we begin our Friday Funda, which is a talk on fashion, on different aspects on fashion, at the India Culture Lab, we're all about cross-pollinating different things. People, ideas, places, and seeing what comes out of these experiments. So at Lakmé Fashion Week as well this year, we decided to cross-pollinate art and fashion. And so some of the art that you see here, for example, and outside has been created by an artist collective called Visual Disobedience. You all can look up Visual Disobedience online. It's a crazy cool collective of really edgy artists. They paint graffiti on streets, they take over places. We did something at the Culture Lab where they took over an old factory and we created crazy graffiti on all our walls, and then we destroyed it the next day. So it's edgy, cool, kind of avant-garde. And that's the thing. We have all of this happening in India and in Mumbai. And at Lakmé Fashion Week, we really wanted to reach out and celebrate that and bring the edge in from fashion as well into this. It's just a start. My Lakmé Fashion Week family is here. I know each year we're going to get more and more edgy and more cool. So thank you, Supratik, for coming and sharing these with us. And with that, we come to the main bit, the Friday Funda part of this evening. The way we've structured it is we have 5 experts on stage. And so it's going to be very different from the rest of our talks where one person comes and gives a long talk. Instead, we're going to start. So we're going to do 2 things. Each of them is going to start with a short statement or provocation based on a question that I've asked them. So they're going to do an opening provocation for about 5 or 6 minutes each, after which we will have a conversation on stage, and more importantly, with all of us. And the idea behind doing this Friday Funda here in the middle of Fashion Week was that fashion is something that happens literally for a lot of us here. Okay, actually, let's do a show of hands. How many of us here have never been to a fashion show? Which is interesting, because this is the middle of Fashion Week. This is where it all happens, and we really wanted to bring people who have interest in fashion to be part of this conversation and to engage with it meaningfully and see what comes out of it. So maybe we can just start right away. If I can sit here and play, benevolent Sutradhar, keeping time in mind and keeping everything else in mind. So if I can please invite Bandana today. Bandana, as you know, is Vogue diva, Vogue reigning diva icon, legend, to actually begin proceedings by doing a short opening provocation on really how in today's Twitter-obsessed times, a magazine like Vogue is necessary or relevant.
Okay, so that's my provocation. He just gave you the statement. My name is Bandana Tewari. I'm Fashion Features Director for Vogue India. One of my biggest regrets is that I didn't start a blog when I should have. At the time, we were just beginning to hear about blogs, and I didn't. And now, when I want to, I look around, and there's so many bloggers, there's so much clutter, I don't think I would have any voice. So I think that, this brings me to the point, with so much clutter in blogosphere, where do we turn to for some sort of definitive direction in trend spotting? So that's when we turn to Vogue. I think because Vogue is 100+ years old, the amount of investment that's gone into sort of raising a voice and nurturing that voice, that definitive voice, in fact, it's paying off more in this online community than ever before. In fact, the way we look at online activity in terms of trend spotting, it's seamlessly integrated with editorial from the magazine. We don't see the company as a publishing house anymore. It's a multimedia company. We produce apps, we do contract publishing, we create original content, and so it's almost like a round circle. You know, of course, I mean, online activity is incredible. I have the biggest respect for bloggers, but it really is becoming a tough call between an individual voice where there's only that much of investment that can go into, or a big company that has come through and being integrated online. So when you talk about Vogue, when I'm talking about Vogue, I'm not talking necessarily just about the magazine. It's also the online activity that's happening world over with not just the magazine I work for, but I think fashion magazines all over the world. This integration is happening. And because of the integration, the online voice of trendspotting is gaining a lot of momentum and gravitas because of what has been created for years as the DNA of the magazine, and in this case, the DNA of Vogue. I think you've got to understand, you know, to raise this voice, to nurture this voice, the kind of investments, the kind of time, you know, we spend, because there are systems and processes in place, which I suppose it's not possible if you're an individual blogger. You know, our systems and processes are so stringent that just because I think there is a trend doesn't necessarily translate into a trend. I have to authenticate that. I have a bunch of people that I have to share these ideas with. Then we have to concur. It has to impact our own consumer base. Does the trend work for India? But I think more than anything else, it is, you know, my colleague in Vogue in Rochelle, she just interviewed the sartorialist, which we're all very aware of as the street photographer par excellence. And he said in his interview that one of the, not a setback, but one of the challenges of being a blogger today is perhaps the challenge of not being able to create really original content. And that's the only way you can really stand out, you know, from one blogger to another, from blogging to magazine, you know, and that original content is what we are, I mean, we do well because we've been doing it for so long, and now we're pumping it more. So I think the original content that's coming out of Vogue and other fashion magazines, for that matter, has become a touchstone for a lot of the online content that's coming in. So, yes, I mean, this is not a debate about, you know, is it's blogging versus magazines. It's not at all. But I think we need to understand the challenges, and where I stand, working in a relatively traditional, you know, magazine company that's now metamorphosing into this huge online entity, as I told you, as a multimedia company, we are relying so much on traditional ways of gathering content, of trend spotting, and that we are translating into online. And with that, I pass the mic on to the next speaker.
Thanks, Bandana. So for the audience, we're just going to take every speaker through some opening thoughts, as I said. So Bandana has told us about how the magazine world is changing, and perhaps in a sense not changing as much, because it's still ultimately about good content that you have to authenticate, which is not very different from how it was maybe 50 years ago. It's just that the medium is changing and the magazine world is adapting to it. We have other speakers who'll talk about retail, who'll talk about street, who'll talk about how people's wardrobes are changing. Our second speaker, I want to ask Tina to actually share some thoughts with us about how she's been a part of this journey for the past 20 years with Ensemble and its legacy, and how she's actually seen Ensemble change in the past 20 years as fashion has changed in our country as well. So Tina, if you can give us some of your opening thoughts about that.
Okay, it's great to see such a packed house. And Parmesh, thank you for calling me. I'm going to start, actually, I wasn't here when Ensemble first started. I was a student in America. But I have a very vivid memory of my first Ensemble show. It was August 1988. I was in the ballroom of the Taj, and the lights dimmed, and this incredible Philip Glass music came on, and Shamali Verma walked out. She was a supermodel in a Rohit Khosla or some other unbelievably original creation. And this is really my memory of fashion when it first started. It was incredibly dynamic, a huge amount of energy. Some things that were created were very amateur, but I would say that the designers really took care that each piece that they made, they poured their heart and soul into. It was a labor of love. And for us, our customers initially were tentative. They really were coming from the whole legacy of India, that they would buy a beautiful Banarasi sari or they would buy a beautiful Jamivar shawl. But they went to the tailor and they stitched a salwar kameez for 100 rupees. They didn't really care about the cut, so long as it was comfortable. And then they shopped abroad. So this was the customer we originally started with, and it was a sort of long education process to bring them up the learning curve. And I have to say, they responded incredibly. As far as our marketing was concerned in those days, it really was the big Ensemble show. It happened every year in October. We spent 4 or 5 months working on it. And I promise you, when we stopped doing that Ensemble show was the time when we started adding new stores, because that's the only time when our time got freed up to focus on retail. But that was really the fashion week of the times. This was before any of the fashion weeks had started. And we would have 8, 10, 12 designers come up with spectacular original work. I mean, you might love it, you might hate it, but it was something to reckon with, and everybody looked forward to it. And the distribution, at that time it was Breach Candy and Linking Road. Nobody could have dreamt that Kala Ghoda would become such a chic shopping district. It was nothing. It was the naval dockyard. It was where the art galleries were. But slowly, Ensemble started there, and now the entire area is a testimony to what can happen when an area becomes vibrant. But really, the distribution has changed tremendously. I'm going to fast forward a bit because the journey has been too long, but I would say in the next 5 to 10 years, there was a great emphasis. NIFT had opened. We had a lot of new designers that were tumbling out. I remember their first collections. All of them were launched by Ensemble: Rohit Bal, Munisha Jaisingh, JJ Valai, Ashish Soni. The list goes on, Anamika Khanna. And it was exciting. And there was, I think, because India is a country known for its draping, but for the first time there was some emphasis on cut. The garments started to change a little bit. It became a little more well cut, well finished, and still a lot of excitement in the industry. Now I'm going to fast forward to the late 90s and early 2000s. So the first huge changes, Fashion Week comes about, right? And that's huge because suddenly, I would like to credit us with launching lots of new designers, but suddenly there's a much larger platform, for young talent to be recognized. There is also, in a strange way, it becomes a democracy, which is great. Democracy has its positives, but the negative is that everything is everywhere. So it starts to become slightly boring. The designers now, for the first time, are, faced with orders, sizes, numbers, and they're trying to think, how do we deal with this? And I started to feel that it slowly sort of started to become more commercial. They had no choice. It's a cycle in every country, but it's something that I watched happening. Simultaneously, I want to turn the spotlight into the media. I don't know how many of you were around at that time, but we didn't have a Bombay Times till maybe early 2000. And I think
late 90s. It was
late
the late
90s. I still remember going for the launch party. And I had no idea how it was going to change the landscape of how people think in this country. And then, all the other HD Cafe, DNA After, whatever. But I feel in some way, you're talking to a huge audience of millions of people, and it starts to get dumbed down further. I'm not trying to be controversial because Parmesh asked us to, but I really genuinely feel that.
Yeah.
Bollywood starts influencing fashion. There are TV shows where, people want to dress the compares, and, suddenly the whole thing is starting to change quite a lot. Customers, here's when the India prosperity story starts to kick in. So, we're having these customers who are reading the Bombay Times and watching this show and watching this movie and want this thing that this actress wore, etc. So that's starting to change. Suddenly malls are starting to spread across the country. So again, that, slightly different paradigm. Now, one more thing happens simultaneously is I think that the designers, firstly, High Street starts to creep in, Mango, Zara. And I think a lot of the designers who were doing serious Western wear really, honestly, strategically shift to doing Indian wear because they don't have that much competition. I mean, I so remember Sabyasachi's first show, all this Western cool stuff, and you know, some years down the road, he took this decision and he became an Indian bridal wear designer. And also, quite honestly, for the designers, it's much easier to manage inventory when you're doing bridal because you have no dead stock, right? You're not making all these 100 pieces and putting them in the store and then you don't know what's going to sell. So bridal starts to rear its head. Designers also realize that this is where India spends their money. You know, this is where the purse strings are loosened. So all these various things are happening. Then, you know, we have the magazines coming up, Vogue, Grazia, you know, L'Officiel, all of them. And again, they start to influence fashion in a slightly different way. And now I'll come to now. You know, of course, Bandana's talked about the huge impact that the internet is having on the marketing that we're doing. There's private equity that's entered the market. And as far as our customers are concerned, I feel like we're really looking at a wide spectrum, but there's the new money, you know, hugely that is willing to really buy anything. And there's our whole, I mean, when I say anything, I don't want to be disparaging, but you know, the whole frame of reference is different. And then there's all these people who've been in the business, who've been customers, who've gone full cycle. There's younger people coming into the buying audience, and they're really saying, listen, now we've seen enough anarkalis, we've seen enough this, we've seen enough that, please give me something special. And this is where really Ensemble has, I think, responded with our new strategy. We're really convinced that, of course, you know, we believe in our designers, and Fashion Week is huge for us. And frankly, Lakmé, you know, a Fashion Week like Lakmé has, last time when I came here, I was blown away with the young talent I saw, you know, so it differs from, but there's a lot of good stuff going on. But we've really decided, and I think many designers and stores have decided to really return to their core, to go back and ask themselves the question, what did we stand for? What do we stand for today? And how can we still keep that specialness in our product and in retail? Because, you know, the market is huge, but we have to believe in what we do and stick by our vision. And, you know, I think those are the brands, honestly, that will differentiate themselves. I'm not saying that many will not do incredible business, because the size of this market is phenomenal, but as far as I'm concerned, what Ensemble is really doing is they're supporting the sari, we're really looking for beautiful things that are at Fashion Week and are not at Fashion Week. We're sitting down with designers at Fashion Week and saying, I like this, but can we twist it like this? Can we edit it like that? Can we take these 7 pieces and then, you know, do them in this color and do this? And designers are responding phenomenally. And now when there was a time when I walked into the store, I used to always say, you know what? I look at the pictures of so many years ago, and frankly, the merchandise looked better at that time. But now, I walk in and I feel, wow, it's all starting to happen again. There's a new renaissance. So that's my story, and I'm willing to answer any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You gave us a masterclass with history, with geography, and ultimately the meaning of fashion. And I'm sure I'm going to pick up on some of these comments in the question and answer session that follows, whether it's about bridal or whether it's about new money. I think there's enough juice for us to have a very provocative discussion. It was enough. It was meaningful. And it was spicy enough for us to have a good Q&A after. But from the history and the breadth of Indian fashion and its context, going much smaller into, say, a personal wardrobe, we now have Malika, who's going to talk next. From the legacy of an ensemble to the newness of a Border&Fall, which is an online destination. I asked Malika to talk about what she was seeing as she runs this exquisite website, which has fashion conversations, but which also peeps into people's closets. And we see what comes out of the closet. And I really like when things and people come out of the closet. So Malika, if you can tell us a little bit about what you are seeing when you go into people's homes and they open their closets for you.
Thank you, Parmesh. So part of what we're seeing through...
Can we have the mic the volume higher? Thanks.
So part of what we're seeing through a feature on the site, which I call Wardrobes, and I'll give a little bit of background to the wardrobe feature. It's essentially a project that I've been working on for 2 years, where we're documenting individuals with a distinct sense of style. And when I say distinct sense of style, I'm not saying the most stylish or the most fashionable, but it's really people who I feel like represent where India is today in all its diversity. And while we're working towards While we're working towards building more representation of India, right now we're focused also on the urban middle to upper class. That's just in terms of a reference where I'm speaking. I'm seeing three things really. I'm seeing the omnipresence of craft and the simultaneous shift away from traditional Indian clothing. I'm also seeing that people are creatures of comfort. They operate within a comfort zone in terms of what they wear. And lastly, that people are very emotionally attached to their wardrobes, and the wardrobe really reflects the person. So the way I'm seeing these is that everybody I've photographed, and it's been about 50 people now, has an element of craft in their wardrobe, whether it's someone who's consciously championing a handloom, or someone who has no idea what bandhani is but happens to have a t-shirt of bandhani or get stuff made by a tailor. The realities of craft in an Indian wardrobe is definitely secure and a given. But at the same time, I'm seeing a shift away, a dramatic shift away. If I look at people under 35 who I photographed, there's only one person, and I think I have about 25 to 30 now under 35, who's actually identified a sari that they wanted. And people over 35, there's much more of that. So I do feel that the future of Indian traditional wear is not necessarily relevant for the next generation in terms of what they identify as their core style. And so I know there's advocates that say the sari is secure or whatnot, and I feel like maybe an occasion where it is, but in terms of what people are identifying as a wardrobe choice, I don't see that in my work. And also the next, and to that point is I'd asked someone who had a wardrobe filled with Zara and ASOS. I said, "What did you wear before Zara?" And he said, I don't know. And I think that's incredible given that Zara has been in the market for less than 2 years. It's fascinating. So the second thing is that people seem to be creatures of habit as well. There are clear silhouettes that people gravitate towards, whether it's someone who wears chiffon saris and silk tunics, or someone who only wears plaid shirts and pleated pants. Throughout all the stories, there seems to be a definite comfort zone. But interestingly, people also identify pieces that they don't wear, that are in the selection that they make. So they feel really drawn towards certain things that, and I call these things influencers. So they can be things like heirlooms that have been passed down, or something that they've bought on a travel that they really like, which are within the same realm of their style. It's not so disjointed, but for some reason there's a clear line drawn between what they wear that's in their wardrobe and what they just derive influence and inspiration from. And the last thing is that I feel that people are very emotionally connected to their clothes. Something really interesting happens. It's a very intimate and personal kind of cycle that I see someone going through, and I'm very privileged to see it, is that when you have someone pull out all the things that they feel connected to and that represent them on their bed or in their room, and you're looking at them, something happens at a certain point in time, and a lot of them shift and they become overwhelmed, and the stories start coming out about all the things. So whether it's the outfit that they first met their husband in, or the first pair of earrings they bought with their own paycheck, every single thing seems to have a story to it, which is really beautiful. And at the same time, there's a realignment that happens because people see what they identify with, and then they see the rest of the stuff they haven't pulled, and they just start purging. And they just start trying to they're like, I need to clean up my wardrobe, and they just start getting rid of stuff. And that's really interesting. And so I really
do a TV reality show out of that.
and then I also feel that, like I was saying, clothes, we're really connected to them in such a way that I do feel they're an extension of us. When you look at someone's wardrobe story visually, I've had people sort of relate personal characteristics and traits, whether it's not necessarily, this person likes traditional clothing, or they wear Indian, or they're conservative, but this person seems meticulous, or this person seems, quite fun-loving. And they get that just from photos, and that's the reason we haven't put the person's photograph next to it, because it doesn't matter. The wardrobe seems to tell the whole story.
Thank you. I think one mic works well, so. So we've gone from, you should all come. But if all of you don't have passes, for those who don't have passes, we have 4 passes that Lakmé will very happily give to either the smartest or the silliest or the sexiest question. So just a little more impetus for you to ask questions. So after we've done with opening provocations, we are free to ask questions, and so we have passes. So you can choose. If you're single, you can take 1 pass. If you come with 2 people, if your question is smart enough, we'll give you 2 passes. We have Saket here who can play arbitrator and decide who gets which pass. Cuteness helps. We are at LFW, of course. Intelligence helps even more. So, and with that, we're going outside. So now we've been inside. We've looked into people's closets, and we're going to go outside on the street. And I've known Anirban now for many years. Anirban goes out. He lives in the real India, which is sometimes a scary place, but it's also a fascinating place to be in terms of how people make sartorial choices. And he's been working on a multi-year project to understand how middle-class India lives and consumes fashion. So I'm going to turn it over to him to tell us stories from outside this fashion world into that real world.
Thank you, Parmesh. Before I get out on the street and share with you some of my experiences, I'd like to just start with a small quote by James Lever, who's an art and fashion historian. He, I think, famously wrote that, clothes are never, a frivolity. They are almost always a fundamental expression of the pressures, economic and social pressures of the times. I think most of you who kind of work with fashion and are part of the industry will know and be familiar with the fact that fashion does have a social agenda. It does have a social role, whether it's about social class or social identity. My work as a brand consultant has taken me out to various parts of India, and I've traveled, and I've had some interesting experiences because I'm not a fashion person. I'm a brand consultant and researcher. I've had experiences which have kind of brought me really close to how people use fashion and how they use it to make meaning in their lives. I'm just going to take 2 or 3 small stories. These are like 2-line stories, just to bring alive some of these experiences and maybe draw from them some learnings that may or may not sort of be used very actively by the industry today. The first experience is actually in a town called Salem down south, where I met a bunch of guys who had just come, young guys who had just finished giving a job interview, and we were sitting in a local restaurant. After some time, I noticed that one of them, he was like formally dressed in a proper shirt and trousers and polished shoes, while the 2 others, one guy had short sleeves, the other guy had a rolled up sleeve and wearing jeans. So in conversation, I just asked them that does this qualify as formal wear for an interview? The answer I got was brilliant. They said that no, there is MNC formal and there's local formal. So this guy went for an interview to an MNC, so he has to wear an MNC formal. We need to wear local formals, and we need to say yes, sir, and we get English, sir, and that's good. It's interesting because suddenly you realize that something which is so sanctified, formal clothes to work, suddenly is being subverted because there is a structure that you find, there's a loophole that you find, and you're finding ways of escaping it. And literally, you're play acting conformity. You're not really conforming to those standards. You're just pretending as if you are. The second experience that I'll talk about is from Bareilly. And in Bareilly, there's this marketplace, which none of you, I think, will call a fashion marketplace, but it does sell fashion. And in the course of visiting one of those stores, I sort of chanced upon a suit that they were selling. Now, this suit is not like any of the suits that are being sold here or being displayed here. This was a suit which had a tie, a very sort of a shiny, bright fabric. It had a tie and a jacket stitched onto the shirt, and it was all in the same color. Now, it's one way to look at it is that that's a mockery of a suit, and that's exactly what it is. That why do we need a suit? And if we do need a suit, then let's just do what we want to do with it. And that's what happens on the street, and that's what you experience on the street. The third story really is about vocabulary and how vocabulary is so central to fashion. This was in Bhopal, and I was sort of hanging around in this place called Number 10 Market, which is a popular hangout spot for kids in that area. And I've met this young guy who was wearing these really thin, thin black jeans and a black shirt. And he had long hair, and he had these interesting piercings on his eyebrow. And he was hanging around, chatting with this cigarette stall guy from whom I was buying cigarettes. And I was waiting there to take some pictures and sort of, interrupt some people's shopping trips. After some time, I found this guy and their, Bhopali banter between the two, which was in a very, very colorful language, very, very interesting. And I said that, I want to take some pictures of you, just to document and take back with me, because, he said, 1 second, let me come back with my emo look. So, not emo, sorry, emo. Yeah. So he went and he just kind of wet his hair, and suddenly he had these, towering sort of spikes coming out of his head in all possible directions, and I could see that whole slightly Jap sort of anime emo kind of a look, and as I was taking pictures, I asked him that, how do you know this is the emo look? Oh, see, I know. Look at my phone, and there were some pictures that he had downloaded of Japanese kids with those hairdos and piercings. Now he doesn't really need to get what the cultural context and the meaning and all of that of what emo is. But he has seen a screen, he has seen a surface, and he has seen some connection with that. And he has short-circuited the entire process of growing up with a certain music, aesthetic, culture, art, and in one MMS, which he has downloaded. Basically, if you look at all these three stories, you'll see that there are really two interesting principles. One is the fact that, fashion seems to almost always be a response in India, in small town India at least, to changing institutional architecture. It could be patriarchy, it could be the kind of places where you go to work, it could be, all kinds of institutions, and every time something changes, there is a dialogue, there is a playfulness, there is subversion, all of that takes place, and that's how the individual kind of expresses that new relationship with those institutions around them. The other thing really that you understand from these experiences is that fashion is about accessing a really, really powerful, really expressive vocabulary about yourself. To me, who's not from the industry, and when I look at it from the outside, it often seems that fashion builds these firewalls around itself and makes itself almost inaccessible to a large number of people. So I have got to get designers and their heritage and where they come from and their vocabulary. Whereas what we see on the street is a way of, kind of bypassing the entire process. They are developing their own vocabulary. They call Jodhpur's balloons. They have names for everything. There's a shurti, which is a marriage between a shirt and a kurti. I mean, they are creating vocabulary all the time. And my provocation really is that I believe that fashion as an industry could do well to sort of allow some of that dynamism, that playfulness, that subversion, all of it, to allow that to seep into its thought and into what it does. Thank you.
And let's see if we can answer that provocation on the panel and in the audience as well. And let's also, I want to ask Edward if the online world is as provocative as what you're seeing on the street. So we started with how media is changing online. We went to the past, we looked inside people's closets, we went out, and now we'll come back home to that laptop in the middle of the night, that screen, that glow from that screen, and there's someone in there typing in something, and it's not what you think it is. It could be, that could be on another window, but on another window there's this Pernia's pop-up shop that they're looking at. And Edward, do you want to tell us what people look at, what you found in your journey when you've gone from being in this offline fashion world that we're all living in, into this deep, personal, intimate online world? Tell us.
First of all, I want to explain my work at the website. I'm the creative director for the website. So I'm really just responsible for everything from the buying to how the website looks, to each and every product that goes on the website. I see everything. And it's very interesting for me because, as my background in fashion was just as a fashion editor, I was mostly into styling. So to see that and compared to a website, because, when you work with a magazine, at least the magazine I work with, we work 3 months in advance. So what I actually see in the magazine when it comes out, I've already forgotten about it, right? But in a website, it's really instant because what you put up the same day, sometimes it gets sold out. For example, what we're doing, this season in Lakmé, we're going live with a few designers where, the runway pieces are available the minute it's on the ramp. So it's really that crazy instant. I always used to wonder when I used to work with a magazine, do actually people follow my stories? Do they see? Do they actually follow the trends? Because you just put it out there and maybe hopefully people will see it and people will buy it. But in a website, you know it immediately whether you're a success or you're a failure. So I mean, it's really that interesting, and also I get a lot of questions by people like how runway finally comes into reality in the ramp. And what I see now, initially, even before I was in retail, I always thought all the clothes that I see in the stores are just a trickle down version of what is on the ramp. It still is, but it's not as it used to be, because people want the runway piece. They want exactly how it is. Even, for example, we have a masaba side, it might be styled a bit differently. they want it like that. It's really interesting because I'm really surprised, because I really think generally, you know, the Indian market is a very difficult market to, I still don't understand. You know, it's like a 50-50 whether, you know, you think this is going to work or is it not going to work. And so far people are reacting really wonderfully to the website, and really, you know, it's fun to see your work. Because whenever we pick up a designer, I pick it with a lot of love. I select the piece with a lot of love, and to see it getting sold out, you know, immediately, or maybe the next day, or maybe later, it's just really amazing. And I feel really bad sometimes, you know, not all designers, you know, get sold out the same day, and I'm like, oh my God, I feel really bad, because I feel like I'm personally responsible for them, you know. So I guess.
Have there been any surprises in terms of something that you never imagined would sell and that's sold out, or something that you thought would be a hit online but people haven't?
You know, it's all the time, because the thing is that when you are in retail, you can't think for yourself. You know, that you should be the last person you should think about the customer. So for me, my customer, they're my gods. You know, I'm supposed to order for them what they like, what they could like. But yeah, there are times when I have, you know, said, oh my God, this is not really my style, but, you know, it's sold out the same day. So yeah, it's a 50-50, I guess.
Oh, thank you. So from what I've learned that everything is happening. I've learned that people value the past. I've learned that people want to forget about the past and like maybe have a conversation with it, but they value the street, or they value, you know, fast fashion in that sense. I've learned that people are respecting traditions, but they're also subverting them and playing with them, which means everything is happening all at once. And I don't know if maybe that's how we are. We are like this only. But I have, you know, I can start off with many questions, but I want to enable all of y'all. You know the difference between interactivity and participation. Interactivity is a function of technology, which means you have a button on your phone. I'm assuming, you know, you can use it to tweet. Participation is when you send that actual tweet. So participation is a function of human beings and culture, which means, of course, please tweet online, please follow us, please tweet, please be part of this conversation online, but also please participate in this conversation offline with us. We have a range of voices from various fields. They're all experts in their fields, and they're all deeply passionate about fashion, as we've heard recently. So I want to invite you all to participate in this conversation. I will bring the mic to you. Of course, you'll get fabulous tickets at the end of it. I will go out on a date with you, and so on.
First, let me thank you, Parmesh, for killing the snobbery of the entire fashion thing as I've seen it over the years. Getting us to interact, getting a platform wherein, you know, you can see it just the way it is. Now, coming to Tina, she took me down memory lane. Tina, this is years ago. I was at Flair, a magazine which had a slight shift of focus into a family magazine. We focused on fashion, which was something totally new in the Indian market. And I remember the Ensemble launch. It was quite a story. I remember visiting Lionsgate and actually locating your store. And I also remember the NIFT, the first contest where they had these exhibits. I remember this elaborate Taj outfit for the embroidery, which was sold for 500 rupees, which we could not afford. So we rather go to Fashion Street and pick up, you know, the lycras that had just come in and stuff like that. And the evolution from street, right, maybe online to where we are today. And there you have the Zaras and you have the Vogues, the L's, which, I mean, is a marketing genius. Media has involved, the dynamics have changed. So, no, this is a comment because quite honestly, it's been quite a walk down memory lane listening to all of you speak. And thanks, Parmesh, for this opportunity of really seeing it, you know, from the years, say the 80s, 86, 87, down to 2013. Thank you.
Thank you. Here. So if you want to ask questions in the back, raise your hands really high.
Hi, thank you. It was a wonderful panel. From what I heard, there was like an interesting divide between the panelists, even as you're sitting, the influencers or the decision makers, and what Malika and Anirban talked about, the fact that what people are doing with their wardrobes, or what's there outside in the street and city in middle India, so to say. My question specifically to Malika and Anirban is that did you find, or as part of your conversation, who are the influencers? You know, like in the wardrobe, you talked about the heirloom pieces which have come down. And by the way, I love that section on your website. But did you get into conversation in terms of designers, or what do they read? What informs their fashion choices? The wardrobe, of course, is telling in itself, but how did they arrive at that particular wardrobe is what I'm trying to understand. And same with Anirban, like you're talking about what's there on the street, but who's deciding what comes out in the street? You're talking about the consumer who's choosing to wear it. My question is, who is that? And Ensemble puts something on the ramp, and then that trickles down and gets, what's the process? What are the who's connecting the dots is my question.
Can you also tell us who you are? Can anyone please tell us who they are so we know who you are, please?
Just my name? Okay, my name is Sumati, and I'm a writer. And fashion, I've written on fashion previously, on the industry, and I'm a quasi-academic. And that's why I'm interested in what happens to the structures, who are the producers, who are the influencers, what connects Ensemble. Like what Vogue and Ensemble connection is pretty clear to see, and to some extent, the connection with Border&Fall as well, because as you clearly said that there is a very socioeconomic group that you've been working with. But how does that, what is the direct line, or what are the parallels?
If that doesn't work, I've got you this.
Sure. I think this is good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Hi, Samriti. Thanks for the question. So I'll just attempt to answer part of it. Let me know if I've answered it well enough. But I think to your point of me asking people where those influences come from, it's very different for different people. So, for example, an 85-year-old in Calcutta will have a life's worth of artifacts, accessories, clothing that she has culled, curated, been through emotionally and she knows what looks good on her body. And obviously, as you're older, there's a comfort zone that you want to stay within. So a lot of the older people tend to favor, let's say, a sari, or again, silk tunics. And with younger people, like I said, there's a clear influence just in what they're wearing with, where India is today, which in the last 5 years has been, growth. And prior to that, I mean, you have different stages, right? You can really see, based on the generation, how we moved post-socialist to then, an open economy. You see all that. And then, as FDI is opening up and as digital space is opening up, you see directly what those influences are just by the brands that they have and the accessibility to those. So I really think it's very individual for each person. And where it's kind of like nature, nurture too, right? People are, of their environment. So there is a lot, which maybe people won't admit, but of the class they grew up in, or the family they grew up in, or the work that they do. So magazine and the website are very valid.
No, I do believe that, trends percolate down. I mean, you look at... Trends do percolate down from big media, powerful media. It's unimaginable to think, why would a magazine like Vogue or a magazine like Elle, all these big fashion magazines, what they're saying, how does it go down to the street? How does it reflect? But, you just have to jog your memory and realize fast fashion like Zara, H&M was exactly that level of percolation that happened so quickly that big trends from the ramp went mass to mass market production. And then it's reaching kids who certainly wouldn't want to buy a very, high-end fashion bag or shirt, but now they can get that trend in Zara. But that percolation continues to happen. And it does go to the places that you talked about. And not to forget that just because we are saying Bhopal, it's not immune to what's happening with the rest of the world. He's talking about someone who wants to emulate a Harajuku girl from Japan, who doesn't necessarily have to imbibe the culture or immerse in it, but that visual imagery, which now he gets through technology, is being percolated. right down to him. And the Harajuku girl and who she is and how we've sort of idealized that notion, that idea of that person, again, perhaps comes from magazines, perhaps comes from some sort of popular cultural debates that have happened all over the world. So I think there's this constant shifting of identities and acceptance, which goes from the ramp right down to the street.
If I can add to that, Henry Jenkins, who's my professor at MIT, coined this term called being a pop cosmopolitan. And he said in today's world, because of media, and certainly because of migration, because of both, but even if there's no migration, just because of media, one's cultural affinities need not be linked to geography. So it's exactly that. You could be a Harajuku fan in Bhopal, you could be an emo in Iraq, and they are discriminated against, but they still continue to be who they are. Or you could be a Bollywood fan in Tokyo. And so your whole sense of who you are is de-linked from geography, and that has magic, and that has also fears. In fact, a lot of the reaction to a lot of what, say, the right wing in our country fears as being un-Indian is a reaction, is a fear to this, there is this imagination of what it means to be Indian. And when people try and play with that, or people try to enlarge that world and encompass a lot more into it, people have these fears that this is not, and they have this thing that this is what can exist in this universe and whatnot. But as we are seeing, both, at high level conceptual fashion, whether it's a Chanel which does a Paris Bombay show, as well as on the street, is that, people are very cosmopolitan in their practices. That's just one thing I wanted to add. You wanted to say something? Yeah. Please.
I just had one anecdote. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, he's #1, top rung designer. Now, when he is designing something and he's making a sample, and this is a story he told us, when he's sampling, he'll buy a certain amount of cloth from his vendor. The thing is, when he buys that cloth, there are 50, 60, not designers, but your corner shop guys who are waiting to see what kind of cloth he's going to buy, and they wipe it out clean because they know he's going to be making something out of it. So this is not a top-rung designer who's, hiding behind. It is literally the tailors, the guys we go to for our regular stuff, right? So what he has to do now to safeguard his creative DNA, he has to buy the whole lot, whether that sample is going to reach fruition or not. So he's got to buy the entire bundle of cloth just to make one sample. God forbid if he does plan to have it, then, he can have something original. So that sort of percolation, again, that how do they get influenced by fashion, which is high-end, I feel this says a lot about it.
That's beautiful. I know Anirban has a story as well that I want him to say because he's told it to me before, and I think it's very interesting in that. But I just want to continue the thought, and I'm sorry I'm rambling, but theek hai. So continuing from the pop cosmopolitan a bit, because it's something that I really want to share with y'all. Added to that, and for those of you who have smartphones, and I'm sure you do, please Google Henrietta Moore. She's an anthropologist at the University of Cambridge. And she said something very interesting about the process of globalization. And, she studies globalization and meaning making. And one of the things she said is that she was traveling, say, for example, she would go to these places. For example, she would go to Yugoslavia and she would find children with, African names. Or she would go to Africa and she would find someone called Kosovo. And she would say, what does it mean? How can someone in an African country, which has very little penetration of, say, television or cable television, etc., even hear of a place like Kosovo and name their child Kosovo? And, meaning in a sense has been de-linked from history in that sense, and it's become very playful, and then we can do what we want with it, which to me is really exciting. Of course, history is very important, but I think this playfulness, this what is called mashup culture, has in itself huge possibilities of meaning making as well. So I'm going to give it to Anirban because I really want him to tell his story as well of influencers. We have like half an hour more for the discussion, so chill.
Sumati, I don't know a lot about how the supply mechanism works. And yes, though, while at one hand it's a popular notion that fashion percolates top down, the best way I would describe fashion that I have seen on the streets in small town India or middle India, as you rightly put it, is non-linear. It is completely non-linear. there is no reliance on history. There is no history. There has been no history. So it is, where is it coming from? There is no systematic historical media relationship. So where does that come from? Technology or media in a larger sense, not necessarily fashion media. Media plays a huge role in bringing alive this non-linear adoption. The other thing that happens is there are people there who I sort of like to call missionaries of modernity. I'll tell you about one such person. This is the story Parmesh was referring to. This is in Banaras. There's a fashion store called Chota Mall. You've been there. So you have met Madam. Yes. So Madam is the fashion evangelist, and she basically helps the local citizenry overcome their fears about wearing certain articles of fashion, clothing, accessories by wearing them herself in the store. And that's how the owner that's why he has her in the shop. So that's a fantastic model, and you see a lot of that as you travel around, and a lot of local designers who I believe are creating more interesting, playful vocabulary around fashion for people to consume.
No, wait, because there's many hands. We'll come back to you later. Thank you. She says thank you. We have a question in the back. There's Varun, and then over here.
Hi.
Tell us who you are very briefly, and then ask your question.
Hi, my name is Varun. I work with Harper's Bazaar. I have a question for Anirban. Anirban, I was very interested in your anecdotes, the ones that you began with, right? They had a common thread running through them that certain items of clothing have found their translation in a larger context in sort of non-urban India, right? But in your experiences as a researcher, as a brand consultant, as you said, and you were a sort of an observer outside the pale of this privilege. So in your experiences, was there ever a time where a mainstream famous fashion designer sort of found a local translation? Were they referred to by name by anyone? Because I want to know, was there ever, in your experience, a moment where these two worlds collided?
Sorry, I didn't get your name.
My name is Varun.
Varun, what I'd like to sort of mention, what I have encountered personally, and honestly I can talk about, is really there's a lot of local talent. There are a lot of small designers, like there's this guy I met in Surat who calls himself DG, who talks about how he's sort of looking at various trends that come in from China or wherever else, and he says that मैं कुछ copy नहीं करता हूँ, मैं चार से चार अलग-अलग idea लेता हूँ, उसका अपना original बनाता हूँ. Now that is a kind of thinking that you're beginning to see among small local. These guys haven't had any training. But they started out these journeys, and he's creating versions of the Jodhpur, and he's creating these crinkly pants and stuff that I can't really verbally describe because you've got to see it. And there's a franchise for that. There's a market for that he's creating through these acts of innovation or sort of mash up, as Parmesh said. So what you do see when you travel on the street and look at small town India, certain things which get adopted like templates. For instance, I was working on this fashion project where I had the good fortune of working with Manu. He's left. So he was shooting a lot of pictures for us, traveling with us, and suddenly you realize that there's this hoarding out there with Hrithik Roshan, endorsing whatever brand that he endorses in his checkered shirt open till his navel and his tight jeans and belt, etc. And then right below that you see a kid walking down wearing exactly that, looking exactly like that. So it'll be unfair to say that everything is invented and everything is sort of created and everything is original. There is a lot that is being done by brand marketers that is being taken on as a template. But that's actually, if you ask me, it's like tip of the iceberg, because there's so much else that is going on that they haven't really focused on. Some things click by chance, by good planning or understanding of where the consumer is. But I'd like to say that most of it is being fueled by local talent. These are people from those towns, from those cities who are kind of beginning to, understand what is going to, they have a sort of broader view of the world, they're seeing things come in, and they're acting as translators almost of fashion.
Hello. My name is Salil. I review research papers and other texts. My question is for anyone who is willing to take this. How environment friendly has the fashion industry been, say, before 1991, that is before India opened up, 10 years later, now, and what do you see in future, say 10 years later?
How environmentally friendly has the fashion industry been over years? And where do you think it will be?
Well, I certainly don't have the statistics, but from my little experience, abysmal. I mean, I don't think people have understood the urgency for sustainability, environmental friendly, because it's more expensive for designers to be environmentally friendly. I think it's more than just a designer saying, I want 100% cotton, and I also want to know where the cotton is produced. So it's not just buying the cotton, you want to know what's the provenance, really, where is it being sewn? I mean, is it being done the right way? And that requires some sort of governmental strategy, which involves in an industry level. In India, at least I feel amongst the designers that we work closely with, there are a few designers now who it's part of their agenda to make their clothes environmentally friendly. We see them coming out of brilliant institutes, like especially designers coming out of NID, National Institute of Design, because I think their program is such that it's inculcated in them to plow back what you reap, Are they? Okay, so I particularly feel very proud that this sort of sensibility is coming through, but certainly not done to the extent where we actually make an impact. And to tell you the truth, it's not happening worldwide either. In fact, the brands that worldwide are making an impact with very organic, environmentally friendly clothes, they're extremely expensive. And they're like niche companies, and they are working in a variety of ways. So how can they make this mainstream? But it's still a tall task. I mean, I wish I had a better answer for this, a more positive answer, but that is the state I feel it is in. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, this is Jenelia. I don't come from a fashion background, but I, of course, have a keen interest in it. This question is open for anyone to answer. As Coco Chanel says, fashion changes and style endures. So then how do fashion weeks across the globe dictate, define, differentiate, or combine the both?
I know, that's, I think what she was trying to say is don't be a fashion victim. Like anything, like any industry, you're being provided a gamut of things to choose from. And we are just providing a service. The fashion industry provides the service of telling you all the goodies that are out there, just like the food industry would do. Just, those are your choices. But I think it's very important now to realize that that level of consumerism which made fashion such a dirty word. I still struggle as a fashion writer, because then fashion writer is not really a writer, We have to always justify, because we've bastardized the notion of fashion so much because we haven't understood that it's a service that's provided. You wear clothes every day, I wear clothes every day, we eat, it's an industry. So there's no need to, I think we get moralistic when we talk about fashion, that it's high fashion, low fashion, are you too fashionable, are you a fashion victim? I think it's as a service, it's what you can dip into, but I think today when you look at the consumers and what you said, when you're talking about your wardrobes, I think that overt consumerism of the 80s is over. You want to be a thinking person, you want to put some mind to what you're wearing, and therefore street photography became so big, because only on the streets could you see people who are putting mind and ideology and personality into their clothes. And it became a common theme across the world, so much so that the ramps of the world started imbibing that culture, And in fact, now it's getting subverted. That whole language is changing, because what you're seeing on the street, which was authentic, is now so programmed that I go to Paris Fashion Week and that everyone's already come curated. So now the street fashion has become, it's startling how curated it is. So I don't even know if I answered the question, but I suppose, yes, Coco Chanel said that, but I think it was really saying, don't be a fashion victim. Put your mind to who you are as a person before you consume, and pick out the things you want in your wardrobe.
But before that, I just want to add that fashion weeks themselves, the world is changing, right? Fashion weeks are also not these staid objects. Fashion weeks also change. For example, at the last fashion week, we didn't have a conversation about fashion where we were all sitting and presenting our views or whatever. So in that sense, via fashion week, of course you see stuff, But a fashion week now has also morphed into a conversation between various stakeholders who then, as an outcome of the conversation, everything will change. The weeks will change, we'll change. And this conversation, for example, will influence us in whatever we do. So that's the whole point. So everything is amorphous.
Also, to answer your question, really, I think as a buyer, you come to Fashion Week, and if you're a stylish, kind of elegant person, then you dip into that and you take what really goes with that. There's no stress about having to follow the trends. I think we keep emphasizing that again and again and again. And really, fashion can be a 300 rupee handloom sari. It's just the way you put it together, how, it's your style. And I think that's very important for everyone to remember. Take what you want from it.
Thank you.
I also want to add something that I think is, we all want new clothes every time. It's not, the reason why there are Fashion Week is because we also want to present new clothes for people to wear. It's not really just about the trends, but it's about new and exciting clothes, I feel, as well, no? Yeah, it's not just about trends.
Actually, it's just a conspiracy for all of us to wear different clothes and come every day for 5 days and pretend it's work. That's what it is. We shop all year, we have nowhere to wear them. You can't wear anything, so we all come here. So Fashion Week is an excuse for all of us. But sorry. But it's also, like in India, it's also what she said, it's also what I said, it's everything. We are like that only. Wait, someone else has the mic. So who has the mic? Please answer, Jaldi. Please ask, Jaldi.
Hello.
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 This is Prajakta. Actually, I am not from the fashion background. But my question is, we always heard that the handlooms in India are getting vanished, like Paithani in Maharashtra. So why can't we come up with the fusion where we use the skills of this handloom craftsman, glamour of the fashion shows, and platform like Lakmé Fashion Week to sell it globally?
Thanks for the question. I think that it's a mammoth of a statement or a question that you're posing, and the reality is that there are so many crafts or so many types of even handloom that are on either the verge of extinction, and some that have been wonderfully revived. So I think it's a bit idealist to expect to also look at the job of a designer. They're not necessarily responsible always. They don't need to be responsible to the greater public. They can simply be a designer who wants to design whatever clothes. And I think when we expect that out of designers, I think there needs to be a shift there that's not just at the design level, but at looking at the craft economy in India, which is a big financial resource for us if we're able to harness it, which we're not able to do from the craft side. As an industry, as an economy, it is probably India's strongest economy and most unloved in that way in terms of the recognition or the aid that it gets. So designers are doing that. I actually don't know any, maybe with the exception of one or two, who don't use textile that's either something they've sourced or designed themselves in their collections. If you go to every stall, every designer will tell you a story of either a craft or where the fabric came from and who they worked with. So there are a lot of people doing it, but there's so much more work required.
I think designers in India have to be credited, as she pointed out, with saving the occasion wear sari. As far as craft is concerned, a big development right now is the whole pre-drape sari. It's the concept sari. So a lot of young NRI girls and even younger girls in India who don't want to sit and make pleats, etc., they just jump into the skirt, pull up the zip, and they look like they're wearing a sari. And I have seen, initially it used to be much more, georgette and chiffon, but I am seeing people do that with bandhani and with ikat, and, in whatever way it is going to help. It is. It's a slow process.
I concur. And I think Indian designers do a lot with Indian fabrics, but I think the larger question is the art and craft industry, if it has to, survive, not just survive, but reach its glory as it should. It's a much bigger story than just designers using it as their seasonal trend. So ikat is in this season, so I'm going to make ikat sleeves for that season. That is not what's going to keep weavers employed. The whole point is that weavers have to continue to weave at a consistent rate so they make enough money to think it's good enough to keep up that trade and pass it on to the next generation. So yes, fashion should play a huge role in making art and craft phenomenally popular, cool, hip, contemporary, so we can dip into the resources of all the artisanal villages and all the permutations and combinations. But the bigger picture for it to really be victorious is literally saying, can the politics of our country be saved by believing in the art and culture of India? I mean, I think it's such a big issue, and here, yes, it is a start that Indian designers are more increasingly getting involved with craft, but I think there has to be a much bigger system in place to keep thousands and thousands of weavers healthy, happy in their weaving communities in the villages that you will never go to, but you will access their goods from.
I know Malika wants to say, now this is something that I want to respond to y'all. Most of us here are English-speaking middle class or somewhat like that, and I think it's very hypocritical that we take up movements, so-called citizen movements around things that affect us. So we take up movements around things like rape and physical safety, and we petition our local corporations, and we sign infinite Facebook protests, and so on. But I find it very strange that with something like this, which is craftsmen who are dying, or weavers who are losing their things, we might talk about it politely in places like this, but how much of us actually go out? In India, all of us have native places. Native places all have local crafts. I wonder how many of us who are now nodding sagely here actually use their crafts from our native places. How many of us even know our native places, for that matter? So I think this is not something that Fashion Week or fashion designers have to do. I think you should actually all take a long, hard look at your own sense of your own multiple levels of hypocrisy and then ask these questions. Having said that, it's a very good question, and who asked it? So yeah, tomorrow is Textile Day. So talk to the people at Lakmé. We'll try and give you a pass for that because it's Maharashtra Handloom Textiles, incidentally. Now, one sec.
Thank you.
So there's a question here in front. Okay. Sorry, I'm being very direct, but this is what I feel. Wait. Yeah, and then you.
Good evening. I'm Shivani. I am a researcher with Future Ideas. This question is directed to anyone in the panel who would be willing to answer. I just want to know the panel's opinion on how they think that the Indian identity is evolving, and primarily because fashion learns from that, incorporates that, and also influences that. Where, in the panel's opinion, do you think Indian fashion is heading in the next couple of years?
Okay, in the interest of time, given that we have 8 minutes more, or maybe 10, can we ask 2 or 3 questions and then we'll pick some? So there was that. Where is Indian identity involving? Wait, Baba, if you ask one question, I'll come to you last. And okay, now you ask yours and then you.
Hi, my name is Anirban and I'm an architecture student, and I'm just doing my thesis on architecture and textile, somewhere related to that. So just Googling on the net and knowing about how people are using 3D printing and such technology in the international market. And just to know, when do you think, or a possibility of some Indian designer or some Indian actress portraying it at a international level would be, because all that seems really cool, and we architects also can perform at some level where you actually look at structuring a 3D garment and getting it executed at a printed level and somebody walking the ramp for you. So that's just a general question. Anybody can answer for.
Also related to this question, where is Indian fashion headed? If you look at China, for instance, they've sort of lost their roots. If you walk the streets in Shanghai, you might as well be somewhere in London. I've lived there for 2 years. I've been here for 3. India is very different, but how Indian will Indian fashion be in 10 or 20 years? As you said, younger people have less of saris and so on, and also globalization plays into that. How much is fashion also influenced by the consumer versus by the designer? Like, who in the end has the upper hand to sort of say where Indian fashion is going?
Okay, so I'll give you all the mic. And so one is architecture and conceptual fashion. The other, both questions were about Indianness and fashion. Who wants to take it?
Just a quick thing, if I understood the 3D printing right, I think it's fascinating and it's very young globally. In fact, and things in India take a little bit more time. I think we will see it, and I think globally 3D printing is still finding its feet. It's very relevant in terms of accessories and footwear, but in terms of being able to print out a dress and have, or have it on the runway, I'm not entirely sure it's relevant until it's something that can be scaled and be commercial on top of it. So until then, it'll be maybe a fad, but I don't necessarily know that it has a place in fashion today, right now. And just to quickly answer my inputs on the design in India, where it's headed, I was actually just finishing an article about that, and it's a loaded question. And right now, I believe that we're at at a crossroads where we really need to introspect and look within and ask ourselves, what is that design identity? And does it have to be one thing? And does it have to be about preserving the sari and Indian clothing? Not necessarily. Maybe it can just be about incorporating craft, because that is still very Indian as well. So I think there's many ways to slice that. And I do feel we are at the crossroads of losing ourselves to globalization, and that is very scary. And that is why I started the Wardrobe Project, to capture where we are in this moment of time. I've been in India 6 years now, and since I came to today, there's been a drastic shift in the way people dress. It's happening that quickly, and I think we all feel it. And it's definitely something I think we all have to start asking ourselves, and how important. It's like teaching your kids, you speak Hindi, do you want your kids to know Hindi? Then you need to know Hindi enough to be able to pass that down. If you speak it as a second or third language, how much more is it going to get diluted down? It's exactly the same equation. You have to take it upon yourself to then learn the language, right?
Well, I think in terms of, you said who has the upper hand, who in the end listens to whom, I really think it's a dialogue. And it's a very sort of dynamic situation that changes. Like, designer might come up with something, but in the end, really, the customer has the last word, and the designer responds to them. And it's, there are huge amounts of influences, like we said, not geographical necessarily. It's really like a creature, and that creature grows. And it might become, like she said, in the last 6 years, things have changed dramatically.
I'd like to take on your question on Indian design. Actually, if you really think about what's happening, and in terms of apparel and fashion, what Indians are adopting, if you set fashion aside and just think about Indianness for a little while, just to illustrate what I mean by that, I'll talk about a little religious kind of place in a household in Delhi. They had every god. There was Jesus and a picture of Guru Nanak, and there was the Hindu gods, and there were all Buddha and everything else, all of them in one little space. Indianness is something like that. We are very open. Things can just, you can come in and kind of rule and take over your imagination as well, very, very easily. But I would sort of, hesitate before predicting that means the sort of traditional Indian fashion dies out. Because if we look across a whole host of things, whether it's entertainment, whether it's food, whether it is culture, in every other aspect, we've seen that we've had influences and we've managed to sort of incorporate that in our life. So why should it be any different with fashion?
Good evening.
Just one sec. Sorry, I just wanted to ask something to Edward about this, about who listens to whom. And I'm just wondering how they do it at Pernia. How do you listen to people online? How do you respond in terms of, and then how do you change? Because if something is, so I want just, how do you monitor these things? Each time I click, how do you track what I'm looking at on your website, and how do you respond to me?
Okay, so first of all, it's also according to how much, let me explain. There is it's, for example, a particular product you see, it says it's sold out. But so, we have this little thing called show interest, which means if the customer is interested in buying that, then they can always order. So there's one way of tracking what they want. Also, see, at the end of the day, I might give you 1,000 outfits, 1,000 ideas, 1,000 trends for you to wear, but at the end of the day, it's what they want. So we have to really cater to, even in the store, it's the same thing, you need to cater to what a customer wants eventually. It's not about what I feel you should wear.
My point was, how do you see what they want? Is it by where all they are clicking? So do you see that they are clicking on 10 things and this is what they might want and this is what I give them? Or I just want to understand that process online. If I could.
Well, I think it's just, you just put it in a platter. There's no, like I've said before, there's no hard and fast rule. This is what they want. You know, you just put it in you just put it in your plate and say, this is what we can give you, and then they choose what they want.
You're not telling us your secret monitoring, how you all secretly monitor all of us and our computers. What? Yeah, you have like satellites looking at what we're looking at. You are allowed to ask questions, of course. So, but I mean, I just want her to ask her question first because she's been waiting. Yes.
A very good evening to all the distinguished guests. I'm Prasadini Gautam. I'm a housewife. My question is open to all. First of all, I believe that the fashion industry is a niche market. And then the question arises that, do you feel that the designer who showcases their designing and works are, need the support of the Bollywood stars or the Hollywood stars to publicize it for India? Just to recently I just want to give you an example. Down south, half saree has been out of trend in most of these days. And after the movie, which has really been a blockbuster, where Deepika has been wearing half saree, it is completely turned into a hype, and a lot of people have been coming across that they're wearing half sarees as a greatest in thing. So I would like to give you ask a comment about whether the Bollywood stars play a key role in the fashion industry.
That's I was wondering why Bollywood hasn't come up. I mean,
so thank you.
You should just come for some of these shows. There's Bollywood stars at the end of every show. In fact, there might be some around here, us even now. Where are you, Bollywood stars? No, they are in the lounge, chilling. Yeah, who wants to answer this? Bollywood and fashion, half sari comes back immediately, half sari doesn't. Or should I just answer and say yes? Yes, Bollywood has a huge influence. Major, unbelievable, crazy influence. I mean, not just on our fashions, on our life. All my philosophy of life, I mean, everything I've learned from Bollywood. I mean, I didn't read any books, I just heard song lyrics. And like, huh? What? It's not the only influence, Hollywood also influences me. And Madonna songs. Not Lady Gaga, which all these young kids listen to, but Madonna. You want to say something? You wanted to ask a question to the other panelist? So ask quickly, but I know there's other people also wanting to ask. So ask quick.
So I was just reading about fashion and trying to sort of brush up my sort of fashion knowledge and what's going on, and I came across this fashion writer, Colin McDowell, and he talks about how true articulation of fashion today is happening through photographers and stylists rather than designers. Colin McDowell? Yeah. Yeah. So
I disagree because the stylist is working, okay, let me rephrase this. The original content is coming from the designer. The stylist may be putting it together very well. In fact, most designers do much better if they have a stylist working for them, because, you know, then he can take a little distance from the work, be able to edit, remodify, because the designer is creating something. You know, someone does it on a canvas, someone does it on cloth. So he cannot remove himself that far away from the creative process and what he's created. So then the stylist walks in and is able to do a lot of magic. And I believe, though, that there is no question about it. The designer, it's where it starts. Sure, he may bungle up because, you know, there are too many things going on.
I think it's a collaboration, you know, it's between the two. I think, you know, I mean, sometimes, like, I work with a lot of designers as well. I think it's not just, you know, I don't think you can just say the stylist is the main person or the designer. It's a collaboration, it's a collaborative effort that these both individuals put together and work out something beautiful. You know, a design might design something and then that, you know, he might not be able to put it together beautifully, whereas that's when the stylist comes in and says, okay, you should put this together and make it more beautiful, or maybe you should add these things, maybe you should add a little more embroidery, whatever. So I think they're both, I mean, it's a collaborative effort to me.
And it's the same in any creative process. If you're an artist, you will create 100 canvases, but at the end, you'll go to your gallerist or your curator and they'll say, you know, this works, this doesn't. If you're a filmmaker, you'll shoot some, you'll shoot some 400 hours, and then your editor will say, we need to make a 2.5-hour film. So any creative process, there are people who create. Often they're so close to the product that they can't distinguish between what will work and what not. So they work with a trusted collaborator. Sometimes, normally in the course of these shows, they hate each other because they say, I want this and I love this, and a stylist or a curator says, no, look at it in this perspective. You wanted to?
Well, I think it's I agree with Bandana. I think it's all about the idea, and the idea is the designer. The stylist is more the editor, the interpreter, to give a twist to it.
So, no, wait, 3 more. We started we're all hungry, so we're all going to go eat after this, but we started 10 minutes late, so I'm going to extend this by 8 more minutes. But what I want to do is I want to ask all the remaining questions now. So ask us your questions, and the ones that are most fascinating to our esteemed panel, we'll answer. The others are, you can't ask again, you asked already. Yes, Jaldi. No, okay, over there first. Ask your question, and then bus. Ask.
Okay, first of all, great curation. I love how organically we're talking about identity and class in the environment in a conversation about fashion. My question is, we know the economy is really, really struggling right now, and I want to know, how do you see that impact, one, the runway at Fashion Week, and two, the fashion industry as a whole?
Keep it. Struggling economy, very good. Next. Use this.
We're a country of 50% population which is under 30 years old. To make craftsmanship sustainable for the weavers and the craftsmen, how do you think we can charm this sort of younger audience into being proud of what the craftsmanship is, or making it sustainable for the weavers also? How can we charm them into this?
I'm really happy to see so many young people ask questions about crafts and weaving to me. I mean, that itself, for an old uncle like me, warms the cockles of my old heart. So last question.
Hi, I have a winter wear store in Bombay, and talking about I have a winter wear store with winter garments in Bombay, and this is about the commerce of fashion more than the ethos or the style. When I'm talking about a jacket in Zara, which is for 10,000, and I have a product made from Ludhiana, which is the winter base of India, made for at an MRP of around 3,000 to 4,000, and people choose to buy a Zara. How does a person like me deal with something like this and maybe fight against the brands?
These are all very good questions. Is there one last meaningful orgasm-inducing question, in which case, do you have it? Do you think you have it? Tell me. And then we'll answer all of them.
Well, basically, I'm a fashion design faculty. My question is to Bandana Tewari, ma'am. Basically, how a newcomer would opt for Vogue. Basically, Vogue Honors is a different story, where you showcase all the illustrations, where there are prizes for many students, but how they are supposed to showcase their mode designing actual product with Vogue.
Okay, so we'll ask. That wasn't orgasm-inducing, but Vogue is. Yes, who wants to answer? Fashion, and in times of recession, what are we doing for fashion? How can we help the weavers? And how do our fashion capitals like Ludhiana compete with Zara when they offer? And it could be the same for everything else, right? How does an Ensemble compete with a big global brand? How does Ludhiana compete with? So good. Yes. Who wants to take it? Who wants? So join when you start.
Okay, this is actually looking at this whole question about traditional Indian craft from a slightly different perspective, not from fashion, but to see what are the measures being taken today to kind of make sure that these live on. It's interesting that our government has various schemes running all over the country where you're supposed to take on people and skill them in traditional crafts. There's a small flaw in that whole plan. Nobody knows whether these people have an heritage, whether they come from families who were in this craft to begin with. So it is just about creating livelihoods rather than sustaining the richness of tradition that existed. So that is one part of the problem. It doesn't just go away by training people to keep it alive. The second part, what is really encouraging and what's happening, is that there are young entrepreneurs, designers who are taking traditional forms and expressing them in crafts and expressing them in new forms. My friend Ambika Nehru, sitting right here, runs a brand called Asya. She trains women in UP to do chicken curry work on t-shirts and other stuff where it's never been seen before. Now, I find that kind of an initiative really exciting because suddenly you're making it available and exciting for a generation which has never really seen that or been excited by that in the past. So it is happening. It's not as if it's not happening. At the same time, the measures that are being taken to preserve craft have flaws at a structural level, which is being done at a national level. Now, there needs to be some consciousness, some continuity between the kind of craft that existed and the kind of training that is provided to these people who will carry on that craft in the future. I think that link is currently missing.
And you were talking about a population that is 50% under the age of 30. In fact, I think it's 25 now. Our jobs in the magazines, our jobs with what we do online, I think, if you're talking about engaging a younger public to get them interested in art and craft in whatever capacity they can, I personally believe that we have to make art and craft sexy. It has to be cool. It's got to be contemporary. It has to mean something to me in my daily life. I do believe in heritage, but I think when we talk about crafts now, we talk about it with the whole grandmother did this 5,000 years back. We need to contemporize the language. We need to articulate the urgency by making it something that's relevant to us and to the kids of today. And I feel a big part of my job, which I enjoy doing, is trying to make it cool. I know it sounds frivolous, but it's, that's the only way we're going to consume because everything is moving so fast, fast fashion, whatever, it's moving so fast that just to keep up, I think, and for the arts and crafts to keep up, we need to have the same momentum as the people who are going to be wearing it or we're trying to woo.
Yeah, Malika.
And just to add to that, I think, I believe craft will be saved with design. The minute you have design challenging craft and craftsmen to innovate and to create, I feel like we'll be able to see that change taking place in mindsets when craftsmen are excited. I think we're also so focused on saving mushroom or whatever it is, and preserving it, but crafts are living and they need to change with the times as well. So there's the design angle, and also a fundamental shift has to take place at the craftsman level. For instance, I visited Soraya Hassan Bose, who is a octogenarian weaving in Hyderabad, outside of Hyderabad. She's been doing this for about 50 years, and she has about 20 looms that widows run, and they do mushroom ikat. And there were, on the loom was this beautiful brocade for, Hyderabadi family's sherwani for a groom's wedding. And so it takes a day to weave 3 inches at maximum of that cloth. And she sells that cloth for 700 rupees a meter. And it doesn't yet. And so if they've ordered it, obviously if a family's ordered something 6 months in advance and they're ordering handmade cloth, there needs to be a shift in thinking. And I asked her, you could charge 3,000 rupees a meter. Cost is no bar at this level. And she was appalled. And she was appalled. She said, no one will pay that much for this craft. And granted, she might be older, but there has to be a shift that occurs on many levels for craft to be saved as well. And then just in terms of other initiatives, like he was saying, there's so many initiatives being taken, and a realization, I think, that instead of taking what's happened usually is the craftsman out of his locality, is to bringing those centers to the craftsman. And so there are a few people working on pilot projects or projects where they're building facilities in the villages or the districts so that the quality of life and the likelihood of employment in the craft, and that is all happening. It is slow, but it is happening.
Yes, correct. So we'll take all specific questions offline, which also means that, our panelists will be here. So if those of you who haven't answered your questions, come maul us, come attack us, and ask us your questions. I'm going to do a long-winded thank you because there's many people to thank. First of all, I want to thank our panelists here. for coming, for giving of their time, for giving of their minds, and for giving with their hearts. Everything they said was heartfelt. And I hope for those from non-fashion backgrounds, you might have come to an understanding that everyone who is in the fashion space, whatever we do, whether we research it, whether we sell it online or offline, whether we write about it, this is something that we really care about. This is something that we contextualize in relationship to other things in the world. It's certainly a large part of what it means to be modern and Indian, which is what we try and do through the India Culture Lab, which is why I really wanted to have this conversation, and we'll be having more and more of these conversations at every future Fashion Week, if possible. I want to say a very quick thank you to Purnima at Lakmé, to Saket, to Asha, to Gautam from the Lakmé Fashion Week team. Where are you guys? I think maybe some of them have gone for the other show. I want to thank my whole team at the India Culture Lab for being here. There's been lots of people who've come from Godrej, including all our NID alums. So thank you. I want to thank you all for being a wonderful audience. Those of y'all who came through Twitter, those of y'all who came through word of mouth and accompanied your friends. Really what we want to do is, this is just one conversation. We want to encourage more conversations, certainly between y'all and us, but more importantly between y'all, each other, which means don't run away and go the moment this thing gets over. Please take time to talk to the person next to you or behind you if the person next to you isn't that cute, or diagonally across you, but make new friends. Please connect, because if you have to solve some of the problems that we're talking about in the world, then it will only happen through this kind of cross-pollination, through this kind of connection, beyond the obvious. So I urge you to connect with each other and make that, of course you've got gyan hopefully out of this, but please go home with a new friend. Lastly, I just wanted to say that, fashion will not, go home with a new friend or stay here. There's a wonderful hotel here. Stay here with your new friend. It's all cool. You can come join us for the after party in China House then, if you want. The last thing I want to say is that, fashion will not enable India and Pakistan to make peace or help us save the rupee from falling down or whatever. It might, but seriously, in that sense, it's something that we do, it's something that we engage with, but it's also about beauty, it's also about playfulness, it's also about magic. And while we intellectualize it and while we debate it from multiple perspectives, let's not lose that magic and that beauty, that sheer visceral connection with objects and the people that make them, that I believe have enabled all of us to be in this space, and that makes so many of us enjoy it so much. So with that rather long-winded note, goodbye, so long, farewell. See you all next week. We have another Friday Funda next week on water, which is happening in Viva vibrant, vivacious, virile. It's very virile because it's green, Vikhroli, at our Godrej headquarters. So see you all there next week. Thank you very much. Now come plague us for questions.